when you look at what's in Zone 1, it's the most intense zone. Zone 1 is usually, for a family, Zone 1 is usually only 1/4 of an acre in size, 1,000 square metres, usually does most people. For a married couple, 3 kids, that type of requirement. It's often 50% hardware. Paths and footpaths, house, driveway, tracks, sheds. It's got gardens, so what we call a kitchen garden. Very diverse. Picked every day. In the growing season, if it's just seasonal gardening climate. Planted 4 to 6 times a month. So we're extending our harvest over the year. If there are any trees, they're dwarf. Dwarf fruit trees. Or multi-graft. Or espalier. That's where they're up against a wall, they're pruned up so they're up against a wall. Multi-graft is where you get different varieties on the same rootstock. Dwarf are selective varieties that were very short, very small, they fit in the space easily. There might be mother plants. These are plants you take cuttings from of particular value. And you extend out from cuttings, so that's like your stock plants of particular quality. There's high value, difficult to grow plants. They're only there because they have such high value, but because they're difficult to grow, they have to be close by so you can keep your eye on them. There are lots of trellis. So trellis is put into function for screening, vertical space, for shading. There's a lot of use of deciduous vines and trees. Because in some climates, you have very hot summers and very cold winters, and you want to let the sun through in winter, but you do want some extra shade function in summer. So their deciduous vines and trees can be put into function. There's usually a nursery section, and that might be shade or glass house, plastic house, but it's a propagating area. There's probably a seed store, which is a very secure area. You don't want to lose the seed that you're producing, so you can extend your systems on. If you're buying in seed, It's usually here that you're storing it as well, and it needs to be rodent secure. There's a feed store. If you've got any feed that you're storing up for animals, there's usually a tool shed and workshop, maybe a garage for vehicles. There's usually a washing line that has to be designed in. Often you need a sunny and windy spot, depending on your climate. And glasshouse may be attached to the house in the cold climates. And shade house and nursery might be attached to the house in the really hot climates as a cooling element to the house. You would only have quiet animals. Worms, pretty quiet, worm farms. Rabbits. Quail. Guinea pigs, which can be used as lawn mowers. Pigeons. You have to be careful with your roof water. Make sure you've wired your gutters and your ridge lines so that they don't sit on the roof all the time and put their high value manure onto your roof and gets washed into your water tank. There are tanks for storage of water, and there are garden ponds for predator habitat. There are probably rockeries and maybe a herb spiral rockery for a diversity of herbs. Of course, there are herb gardens. There's a lot of picking greens, regularly picked and convenient to the kitchen. There's quite a bit of fencing. Right on the edge of Zone 1, you can have compost. You don't really want it too close, so it's out on the outer edge of Zone 1. And poultry in the form of chickens and ducks. And on the edge of Zone 1, where Zone 3 joins Zone 1, so it is possible to bring a corridor through of Zone 3 to the edge of Zone 1. A Zone 3 element might come right to the edge of Zone 1, and that's in the form of a dairy for milking animals. Because they will walk in to be milked, and they can walk through to the edge of Zone 1 in a Zone 3 corridor. It's kind of like a laneway. And you can usually recognise a design that has a milking animal because you will see that corridor coming through. You think, why does that bit of Zone 3 come into Zone 1? Because the milking animal's grazing system are more likely to be out in Zone 3. So that's convenient. These are convenient. These are convenient. if you start to look at this as how does this connect together, well, you know, poultry can connect to compost, dairy can connect to compost, but these can also connect through to worm farms, and pigeons could connect through to worm farms, and rabbits could, and you start to find connections of, if I'm going to walk through this system, you know, can I go from the compost to the garden to the chickens to the poultry? Where are my regular walks? What has to be visited more often? Everything in here has reasonably regular visits. There are some trees in here, they're quite small. They don't have to be visited so often, but they're in amongst the system anyway. You are also looking at, where does that run off? If that's hardware, water runs off. So this has water runoff. Can I design that to be a benefit to the system? Can I design that to actually go through growing systems and enhance the system? What in here has to be really locked down? Now, what are structures, which are plants, which are animal systems? How does that all fit together? It's a very, very intricate system. This is the tightest, the most complex. This has the most density of diversity on the whole system. It's the farmhouse garden, if you like, if you want a rural property. But all of that can fit into an urban space too. That can be an urban system, and an urban system can still have a zone 2 around it. So you've got a zone 1 type approach to this small space, and if you make this too big, you never finish it. You never get out of it. If you try and make a 5-acre zone 1, you won't get the job ever finished. It'll be an endless system, unless you've got lots and lots of people. A 5-acre zone 1 is something that you could support 5 families with. It's a small farming hamlet, or it's a small neighbourhood in a community. In fact, at 1/4 of an acre, it's more than that. It's more like 20 families. So it's surprisingly intense what can go on here, and it's very much favoured with nutrient, and it's favoured with water. Water aims back that way towards zone 1. When you move out from there into zone 2, zone 2's a lot more simple. And all of a sudden you've gone out into a broader system. So from zone 1 to zone 2, the chickens, the ducks, would never free range in zone 1. The rabbits, the quail, the guinea pigs, they're all going to be in cages or moving little tractors, but they're not going to be free ranging through that garden. The pigeons might, because they fly free anyway. So they're an aerial element that fly back to a pigeon loft. But they might go out into zone 2. So on the edge of this system, the handy part of having that edge system of poultry is they can be set out this way. Once zone 2 is well established, there can be a ranging out into the next zone. So when we get out here, you have your food forest. And this is the most diverse food forest on the property. There are other food forests. They're not as complex as this one. They haven't got as many difficult and intense diversity of trees. Here we can put in really, really special, rare species that need very exact conditions and microclimates because they're reasonably close in attention. When we stretch out further, we've got to go for the hardy species, and they'll be identified in this zone. We'll identify our fruit trees that go really well in a broader part of the property, just as we'll identify our main crop in Zone 1. In here, we will easily identify elements of crop capability to extend. So food forest is very diverse. In some places it's called forest garden. Then we go on to our first main crop. Now, main crop gardens are less diverse. It's where we go on to the broader crops. It's where you grow your corn, your maize, your potatoes. Maybe you put a small grain crop in. You've got pumpkins which ramble everywhere and they need more room, or melons in the summer. It's where you might grow okra. It's where you might grow your broader crops. Turnips can often grow out here because they grow pretty easy. Sweet potato is a Zone 2 crop. It's the bulk crops, the crops that take up a large area, and it's definitely your carbohydrate. And here's your storage yield too. If you're in a cold climate, this is where you get your main storage crops. These are the bulk crops out here, main crop. In a lot of climates, this is where you have woodlot. And it's often coppiced firewood. That's where we cut trees so that they regrow. So we cut a tree down to a stump that we know regrows stick fuel. That way we never have to kill any trees. We can harvest these trees for sticks every year and they'll regrow. And we can store up different size stick yield. This is traditional in cold climates, and many products were produced by coppice. So that's how all willow baskets are grown. This is how all chair legs were grown. This is how all wagon wheels were grown. This is how bows and arrows were grown. This is how many fencing products were grown. Animal fences were woven, coppiced sticks, and of course most fuel wood, because large logs don't make good fuel. Sticks burn much hotter than logs. So when you want to be efficient in firewood, you burn sticks because they'll get up to 800 to 1,000 degrees centigrade. And the most efficient way to burn them is with a rocket stove, because you're getting the most value out of the firewood and you're getting less pollution. You're cutting down on the smoke element. It's almost too hot to smoke at all. So if you see rocket stove chimneys, you can't really see any smoke coming out of the rocket stove chimney because it's just hot air, really. And if you want to, you can distill out acetones, terpenes and wood oils by putting the chimney into a horizontal phase and putting in distillation bottles at the right distance. And that's always been done in China, where wood stoves were run on a rocket stove principle. After cooking your food, the chimney went through a bed, stone or ceramic tile bed base that heated up the bed base, then up a chimney and out a horizontal section, and distillation bottles were positioned at the right place to take out the wood oils, terpenes and acetones. And these slowly take out those elements, also means there's even less pollution coming out the chimney. But you have to know exactly which wood fuel you're using to get the right distance. So once you've worked out what your timber is that's most convenient to cut and continuously regrows for your timber use, then you can work out the distances that you can distill out those other products that can be taken from the smoke. And coppice trees live longer than non-coppice trees. So the oldest trees in the world are coppiced. Right? It extends the life of a tree. If this is done, it has to be done well, but it is known that it extends their life. So a woodlot in there, and in here also cut forage. So that's food for animals that you cut and you take to the animal. So it's growing a product that you know has some benefit to the rest of the system, but also can be cut and taken to the animals, and when they've processed it and they're producing manure, we can bring back into the system and it's in a better condition than the forage we took out to them. When we move out again, some of the food forest comes with us. So we go to Zone 3, and it simplifies again. Here we have grazing systems, majorly grazing. So grazing pasture, but in the grazing pasture there's broad food forest. These are the really hardy trees that take very little attention, that have proved themselves in Zone 2. And these ones really grow easy. We can extend these out. There'll be a limited number. There won't be the same diversity you have in the Zone 2, but they're definitely easy to grow. And ideally, they can be processed into storage crop now. They can either be, you're choosing elements that are like nuts, they store anyway, or they can be processed into preserves or dried or made into another product, or they are also animal feed. In some climates, in the cold climates, they might be grazed under by the animals as what's called pannage. So they're storage crop. Process or pannage, where in the cool climates in the autumn you can let the animals into the forest to pick up all the fallen fruit that you can't gather any more of because you've got a surplus. Then you have the large or broad main crop. So here we might go out a bit broader, broad main crop. And we might do a larger grain system, or we might do a larger root crop system for your really large commercial or mass storage system. And farm forestry starts to come back in. So farm forestry starts now. So from the outside zone, which is Zone 4, Zone 4 is a lot more simple. Zone 4 is some form of farm forestry. You just got to choose what sort of forest. It could be a mixture of all sorts. It can be timber, it can be poles, it can be bee forage, it can be animal forage. So these grazing systems in Zone 3 might graze off pasture and forage crop. We might have graze off forage in the pasture, or hang over forage on the edges. So trees hang over the fence line, which the cows graze off. They might be part of a food forest in a broad sense on the edge of the pasture, and farm forestry coming back in from the outside. So farm forestry comes in this way, food forestry goes out that way a little bit. These zones tend to blend. You don't want farm forestry trees in here that are allelopathic to the pasture. They've got to allow pasture to grow with them or next to them. And ideally, they're also trees that when they're big enough, the cows can graze them off if they're hanging over the fence. Or the animals in general can graze them off. So here in Zone 1, if it's not hardware, it's a living system, it's extremely diverse, and most of it is all mulched. So we're introducing organic matter to the ground. There's some cover crop if we're leaving an area bare, so we might put a ground cover annual down just to cover it if we're not using an area, but generally this is mulched and covered in plants if it's not hardware. As soon as we move to Zone 2, over here, more and more, it's not mulched so much as it's cut and dropped. There's mulch growing in position, and you're cutting and dropping it to the ground. The mulch is actually there. Right? We've got room for it to grow in position. And there's ground covers now. There's living plant mulch on the ground. So that's a change that you've made. The maintenance is different when you step out there. When you go out here to Zone 3, the trees there are really rough mulched. I mean, they're really big branches and sticks and logs and, and these are really hardy trees here. It's a much broader, rougher system. And then when you're out in farm forestry, it's literally a broad production forest. There might be, areas where are really good for mushroom production. And there could also be some forestry trees that also have nut product, let's say. There may even be some that have fruit product out there, but they have larger forestry gains as well. Might be jackfruit there that you might harvest fruit from, but they're really good timber in the end. There might be bunya pines in there that are actually really good nuts, but they're long-term timber as well. And there might be majorly timber trees, but there might be some that are really good. You might have areas that are really good for bee forage. So there's trees in there that flower, and you've got bees involved in this system somewhere closer in. When you look at the water systems, generally, the dams out in Zone 4 or even Zone 5 are potentially larger and smaller as they move in, till when they get right inside, in the inner zones, they're quite small, little ponds. Now, there can always be rules broken. It might not always turn out exactly like that. You can't really ever say always. Generally, this is the concept and theme of what we're going to do with water. We're going to aim water back in. In other words, in favour, that area shouldn't run out of water. And next, this one, and then that one. The water demand out here is not the same. The water demand is highest in there, but the bodies of water are more likely to be larger in the outer zones. It can change to landscape, but that's generally the way it will go. So you've got a whole set of systems coming back towards centre. Now, it's never going to look like that unless you're on a flat landscape, perfectly flat landscape. And there are no flat landscapes on Earth that are perfectly flat. The closest you'll get is a salt pan, which is a dried up salted lake. And then actually not perfectly flat. They do represent the surface of water, but they will have a slight tilt on them. Everything else has some slope. And there's reasons why, in relation to the human interaction, that it won't be concentric circles. What will change it will be slope and orientation and the sectors of energy. This will make changes to these shapes. And there will be size relationship inner zone being smallest, going out in potential size. But it'll depend what the people want to do. They might not want to be farmers. They might not want grazing animals. You might leave zones out. There might be zones missing. You might be on a 1 acre property, you don't have a zone 5, or you don't have a zone 3. You might be on an urban block of land that only has zone 1 and a tiny bit of zone 2. No 3, 4 or 5. It might have an expression of 5 in the corner, which is a little wild part of the garden where people feel, well, I can go and sit there and feel like I'm in the wilderness. Not really wilderness, just a sort of expression of wilderness. People usually want some degree of self-sufficiency and sanctuary. Those are the things people actually usually ask for when they're asking for a design. So from here, I've run out of area on the whiteboard here. I'm going to have to explain what happens to the shape of zones when you actually do lay it over landscape and slope orientation, the effects on the zone shaping. And quite often there'll be 2 or 3 zone areas separated from each other. Zone 3 might be separated in different parts. It doesn't go out in concentric circles like this. This is just concept.